Hey, welcome to the Pleasure Points podcast. I'm your host, James Rohr. I am an acupuncturist, energy interventionist, dating and relationship coach, and a guy just trying to have a good time here on the planet. Welcome to the show. Today's episode is brought to us by At the Oilgram. This is Jennifer Panza, my lovely fiance. It is her Instagram where you can access all of the latest and greatest in essential oil knowledge and information. If you have questions, if you're looking for resources and help to solve some of life's stickier issues, essential oils can help get you there, and you can reach her at the Oilgram for all of your essential oil needs. The show also has an email. Have you emailed me yet? If you haven't, do so. pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com. pleasurepointspodcast@gmail. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, what you want to hear more of. I want to hear from you. Help me help you. Today's podcast, I am joined by Sumi Vatsa. She is a realtor, actually, here in Brooklyn. She's also a comedian, a storyteller, a very, very funny woman, very insightful. I've known her. I met her actually through my acupuncture practice, and every time she comes in, we have amazing conversations. So I was very touched and honored that she agreed to come and be a guest here, because I knew that our conversation would be meaningful to you guys out there. So we had a great time chatting about comedy, humor, finding humor in even some dark things, troubled childhoods, and all that stuff. So as always, we dive a little deep here, but we do it with a good time. So without further ado, please welcome Sumi Vatsa to the podcast. All right, and we're live.
Okay, here we are.
Woohoo, welcome.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast, then. I'm so happy that you're here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I was always, when I knew that you were going to come on, I was trying to think about, like, what's the first question I should ask you? And I was remembered, I was going to be like, so what makes you qualified to be a comedian?
Pain.
Yeah. I had this client once when I was working on this book. I was experimenting with a fiction book. And she was like, what was it? She was an old British woman. She was like, what's your book about? And I was like, well, it's about these like teenagers that doing these things. And she was like, what makes you qualified to write about teenagers? And I was like, what kind of horrible fucking question is that?
Right.
It's like, hi, nice to meet you. So I was like, oh, that's Sumi. I was like, what makes you qualified to be a comedian?
Just being a human on this blue marble. That's all. That's really that's all it takes.
Yeah.
Just being, just observing and really having pain being your best friend. That doesn't hurt, I think, to be a comedian. I don't know if I told you, but I'm on the board of this organization called Stand Up Girls.
No.
And we bring stand-up comedy to underserved schools. And we specifically focus on young women. So yesterday I went and watched these girls do a dress rehearsal. And they're high school girls,
Yeah.
And they're deep in Brooklyn. Like, I don't really know how I got there. Like, it was one of those like Ubers where I was like, I'm not really paying attention. I don't know what's happening. But we got there and there were 6 girls, and it was so interesting to see them. They performed 6-minute sets. They kind of did their type fives, if you will. And it was so interesting to see what they were talking about, what was interesting to them, what was funny to them. And some of them were really, really funny and were really in their own bodies and understood the audience, where others were like, well, I'm glad they showed up. You know what I mean? But it was interesting because it made me think a lot about what's funny, what comedy really is, and what's funny to me may not be so funny to you. But to me, I really connected to a lot of these girls because many of them were Caribbean. They had Caribbean parents or they had Puerto Rican parents, and they were often talking in their parents or grandparents' accents, and their ability to code switch was so brilliant. And I realized that, we always talk about how stories put people together rather than, we're in this time, I think, where we're talking about identity politics so much. And it's so interesting to me that when you're looking at these girls who are all from various backgrounds, all of these stories were connected to each other because of them. So it was this like very cool afternoon. I was kind of high for like,
That's awesome.
a couple of hours after that. Anyway, sorry, that was just on my mind.
That's amazing. Were they getting like mentoring in their stand-up?
Yeah, so we hire teaching artists and they come in, and it's probably about $2,000 to run a full program. It's like a 12-week program. We have a teaching artist go in. In some schools, it's an after-school program, and in some schools, it's like during the school day. We prefer after school just because we think it's more like of a club, but that doesn't work for all communities because a lot of the kids have to work or they have to take care of their like younger siblings or that kind of thing. So again, it sort of varies from school to school, but I think we're in 6 schools now. So
That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
That's great.
Yeah.
Breeding a whole new generation of funny people.
Exactly. And the idea is that, they're obviously not all going to be stand-up comedians, but if they can learn to stand up in front of strangers and people, whatever, and speak on their own with a microphone, have their own stories, and if they can do that, then maybe they can go to a job interview. Maybe they can do a college interview. Maybe they can actually own the boardroom at some point. So that's sort of the premise of it. And
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this a lot. Just appreciating a well-told story.
Yes, because there's nothing worse than a badly told one and you're trapped at a cocktail party and you're like, how am I going to get out of this conversation? Because I've definitely been in that. I'm that person who I have a lot of empathy for people who can't tell a story well. So I get kind of codependent in those moments and I feel like I have to take care of them. And I'm not really a good person at a cocktail party because of it. Like if you see me trapped in a corner, you know what's happening. Yeah. That's what's going on.
You're like, let me bail you out of this horrible, horrible story.
Right.
I've got some high school girls that can really help you out.
I know, exactly. It's really bad. Like every wedding, cocktail party, whatever that I go to, inevitably I'm talking to that person that nobody else wants to talk to because I just can't get out of it, it's just the codependence in me.
One of the things that I really appreciate about comedy is I'll listen to Bill Burr a lot, and of course Joe Rogan because he's like, the male Oprah or the Oprah for dudes. Is that listening to them talk about things that when they're in a situation that seems really fucked, it's difficult, uncomfortable, because they've sort of trained themselves to mine every circumstance for comedy.
Sure.
It seems that they have this kind of intention to be really present in that and to not necessarily take everything so seriously. It's like what I like about it is it reminds me of meditation, is that there's that like staying engaged but not attached. It's like what is happening, but try to refrain from the whole story that you're telling yourself about how fucked up you are or like how complicated certain things are, and to just observe yourself having the situation and know that, if the person next to you on the plane smells terrible, instead of thinking like how horrible the flight is for 6 hours, just know that's okay. There's going to be something funny from this.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I think that honestly, most every situation, human interaction is absurd. Like I think I'm at that point in my life. Yesterday, I was waiting for an Uber. It's often Uber related. I don't know. In any event, I was waiting for the Uber and I looked at my phone and the car was stuck. You know how sometimes a little car gets stuck. It's like a video game. So I was like, oh, I guess he's just like in traffic or there's something happening. So as it turns out, the Uber app was broken and he was right there and he was getting really, really upset because I wasn't outside, but it was super cold. So I didn't want to wait outside. Anyway, it was this like ridiculous comedy of errors where he was upset and I was upset. But meanwhile, when I walked outside finally and he was there, he's like, where have you been? I was like, where have you been? And, we're talking past each other. And I got so mad at him because he was like, I can't take you because I guess the app had canceled the ride or whatever. And I just was so mad. I just said, just have a horrible day. That was like all I could come up with because I'm not a jerk, but I was so mad. And he was like, what? And I was like, you heard me. Have a horrible day. And he said, I can't believe you just said that to me. I said, I did say that to you. So then I just started laughing because it was ridiculous. The whole thing was ridiculous. And he showed me, he was like, listen, I'm really not trying to screw you over. And it sort of opened this conversation where I realized that nobody was at fault. This was just a computer error. And this had nothing to do with either of us. So I finally, we kind of settled and I said, I'm so sorry. Have a wonderful day. And he said, you have a wonderful day. And then I got another car and it was fine and it worked out. But I think that, people like Rogan and Burr are so clever in that they recognize that in all scenarios. I mean, I think Burr is the master when it comes to realizing that, let me say something crazy outrageous and make people super mad, and I will bring them back with my humor to show them that actually it's all absurd and silly.
Yeah.
And I just think he's a genius in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love listening to him as he talks about his anger issues, and overcoming them and the sort of the difficulty of that, and I've listened to him maybe for 3 or 4 years now. And just, his kind of progression, right? Because I'm used to being in the room with people as they're processing their anger stuff or talking about emotional triggers and all that. So it's been fun to hear somebody go through his process without, I'm just observing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I guess I never thought about that. Like for you, it's so different because you see so many people process in front of you that if you're in your real life versus in the treatment room, like what it's like to see people just be human, right? And you can see, I'm sure you must see people like in regular life having their process and you're like, I know what that is, right? I mean, it must be the case.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And then, I've gotten in trouble when I've tried to intervene, especially obviously with family. I just sort of lob my observations. And I remember one time, I forget what I said, but I was just frustrated by the reaction that I got. And I was like, Jen, people pay me a lot of money for this kind of advice.
Right.
And she was like, yeah, but these people did not.
They did not sign up.
At one time, my older brother, I said something stupid, and you just sort of set off a fight between him and his partner for a moment. And the next morning, he came down, and I was like, "Dude, is everything all right?" And he just looked at me, and he's like, "Could you just not Could you just stop talking sometimes? Like that thing that you want to say, could you just pull it in? Just keep it to yourself." Yeah, I don't know. I get that from my dad, I guess.
Yeah, that's funny. No, I mean, it's hard for me because I just laugh at everything. I mean, I don't know if I told you this, but I went to the wedding on New Year's Eve, which was super cool. Everybody listening have weddings on New Year's Eve. It was really great. And I was talking to somebody who, he's a friend. He's a husband of a friend of mine. And he started talking about how he was in a colonialist club. And I was like, oh, what is that? Now, I mean, I'm Indian. I know what colonialism is. I was brought up, it was explained to me in a very different way probably than it was explained to other people. However, he's going on and on about the colonialist club. And he was like, Sumi, it's so much fun. You can't believe how much fun it is. I was like, yeah, it's fun for the masters. It's not so fun for the slaves. And so I get what you mean. That came right out of my mouth. It probably not the appropriate thing to say, particularly at a black tie wedding, but it's hard. Sometimes the moment is right there and you have to say what you have to say.
Yeah, especially if it's funny.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was funny. I don't know that he thought it was so funny. He at that point, it was this awkward few minutes, and then he tried to invite me to the Union Club, which is some club that he's a member of, which also sounds sort of colonialist club adjacent. Right. So I was like, yeah, man, that's cool, but whatever. And just kept it moving. But yeah, I feel like I have a lot of those conversations where people, it's funny when you are of color, but you grew up in a lot of, like I grew up in a pretty white community and white people are very comfortable around me and I'm very comfortable around them. It's what I know. So I think that because of that, there's like this faux camaraderie. Do you know what I mean? And people feel like they can say things that maybe they couldn't say to someone else that was of color, if that makes sense. And so I find myself in these absurd conversations all the time. I mean, it comes up a lot.
Like where a white person's saying an Indian racist joke to you?
Correct. Where like
you're Indian, but not like, you're a cool Indian.
But you get it. I was at a holiday party at this place called the Monkey Bar. It's in Midtown. I don't know if you know it. It's just some dumb Midtown bar, but it has all of these paintings of monkeys all around. And I've been there several times and never really thought about it. And I talked to the girl who planned the party and I said to her, hey, great party. Thanks for hosting, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, I'm really glad you like it. And I could see that all of a sudden it was a situation. And I was like, what's going on? So I was like, oh, how do you mean? Because now I can't resist. Right. I'm like, it's right there. I have to know what's happening. So she goes, well, do you find it racist? And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, what? And she was like, the drawings. And I was like, oh, I don't know what you mean. And she didn't want to hear my thoughts. She just wanted to rant about it. So she goes on and on about, well, I don't think it is racist to have monkeys anthropomorphized and dressed like butlers. And I was like, oh, man, how did I not notice that? It was so obvious. And I was like, just like nodding along. And she definitely had a couple of the drinks. So it was like, and I was sober at that party. So it was one of those things where I was just letting her go on. And then finally somebody else came and I just zipped out of there and went to go look at the paintings because I was like, I got to look at these now.
Obviously,
like I have to see what this is all about. And they're about as bad as you'd think they would be. Wow. Like they were monkeys dressed like butlers serving old white men. Like, I don't know that it's more obvious than that, but, just saying. But what was embarrassing to me was that I had been in that place probably half a dozen times. It's like just a random place where, I don't know, there's been a lot of holiday parties for this particular company, so I've been there a lot, and I'd never noticed it. So, I mean, I don't know what that says in
You're
general.
Part of the problem.
Right. I am part of the problem. I'm always part of the problem. No, but it was interesting. I had never noticed it. And the way that it was sort of brought to her attention was that there was somebody of color on her committee that said, I'm not comfortable with this. And she was like, I don't know what she's talking about. And I was like, that's kind of the sort of thing where, I get people feel like, oh, everyone is so sensitive, but I don't know, man. That was pretty straightforward. I was not happy about it, and I hightailed it out of there afterwards. I was like, this is not cool.
Have you been back since?
No, I have not. No more monkey bar for me. So bad.
I know you like to have, there's no easy transition to this, but we're talking about, I had a guest on recently who, her business is really about throwing good parties. She's in this art of gathering and doing stuff with corporations and bringing men and women together. I know you like to host a lot of like dinner parties at your place.
I do.
What do you think is the sort of the secret to a good party?
Well, I probably throw 1 or 2 dinner parties a month. I find that serving 6 people is significantly easier than 8.
Oh.
There's something about that number. However, 8's a better party.
Yeah.
So it's kind of worth the extra effort. I'm pretty particular about the timing of it. I have a 7 to 8 o'clock cocktail hour. I have an 8 to 9:30 dinner seated, and then a 9:30 to about 10:45 dessert in the living room. I find something that really helps a dinner party is movement. So if the cocktail hour is in sort of the kitchen area, then you're seated at the dining room table, and then dessert coffee is in the living room. If you keep it moving, it helps people. It helps. Movement is super important. And I think that sort of splitting up couples, because I often have couples come to the parties. I never have them sit with each other. And I'm really mindful of how I seat people. So I want everybody to have a good time and I want them to be comfortable. And I know that there are bigger personalities and smaller personalities, and everybody thrives with different, you know what I mean, with different kinds of people. So I'm pretty mindful of that. I just make sure that I always sit in the same seat, the hostess seat, because which is closest to the kitchen. That's very old school, but I definitely think it works because I do have to get up and like get things and whatever. I also think that if you plan it such that there's very little prep, you know what I mean? Like while you're sort of in between and transitioning from cocktails to dinner to dessert, it just helps everybody feel like, oh, like it just makes them feel more comfortable. And I mean, I think booze helps. I mean, you know, it's kind of an old school thing.
Right.
I also get magical chocolates sometimes for people where I know if they're open to an edible, I always offer that at the beginning, and I always say, please have half.
Right.
Because inevitably somebody just puts the whole thing in and then they're like gone off the planet for the rest of the meal. And so, you know, I'm very mindful to say, please have half. But yeah, I think those kinds of things really help. And I think really good music, I think you have to have music. It's weird to me when I go to a party and there's no music.
Yeah.
Like even if it's just a dinner, like when I walked into your home and you had music on, I was like, yeah, you get it.
Yeah, nice.
You know, it's a big deal because
Sure.
when you have a totally empty, you know, whatever, it's all an illusion, however you want to look at it. But if you're in this dimension and there's no music filling the empty space, it's just like, it's weird. It's cold. It doesn't feel right. So I do think music makes a big difference. And flowers, I'm always really mindful to get fresh flowers. It makes people happy.
Do you guide the conversation at all?
No, I don't feel like I really have to.
Yeah.
You know, most of the people that come over have no problem talking.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's usually a non-issue. Every now and again, I've had to kind of guide us out of a topic because I'm like, this is going nowhere fast. Usually political. I really don't want to talk about politics at all. And I don't tell people that they can't use their phones, but they don't use their phones.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of known that when you walk through the doors that you're not going to be texting. Now, granted, I have people that they're parents, they have kids, there's babysitters. I'm not a jerk about it, but there's no reason to be Insta-storing this event. It's, you know, I want it to be human. And I don't Instagram my dinner parties. I don't take any pictures. I'm really
Did it really happen then?
Yeah, I know. I mean, sometimes people wonder, right? Because I don't know who it was I was talking to. Oh, it was a manager at work, and they were like, "Wow, you don't really post that stuff on your Instagram." I'm like, "Right." And he was like, "Well, I really think it would be helpful for your business." And I was like, "Yeah, I really don't actually. I think what's really great here is that it's private. There is something to be said about having a really intimate evening and have it be private. I don't mean intimate, sexy. I just mean intimate human interaction where people can really say what they want to say. And I do think that helps people be themselves. You know, I mean, there's no pressure to have to look a certain way or have it lit a certain way. Or I mean, there's nothing that makes me crazier than, you know, oh, well, let's take like 10 more selfies to see which is the best. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted by that. It's so tiring, you know? So I think those kinds of things help. It is different to have, I had a cocktail party for my birthday, and that's a totally different way to plan. I was sort of surprised at how differently I had to think about it. I had to think about the flow really differently. I have a railroad apartment, so with 2 entrances. So I had people enter on the opposite end where my bedroom was, so they could put coats down. If they wanted to take shoes off, they could, but I had no rule about it because I just knew it would be too hard. It's winter. And then it's then living room, office, dining room, kitchen, whatever, bathroom. But I had food and all these, and lights and candles and flowers in every room so that wherever you ended up, you would have a drink and you would have a snack, and it didn't really matter where you were. And it was super fun. I like a theme, so I picked desert chic. So there were lots of cactus flowers everywhere. I got paper cactus flowers.
Nice.
Yeah, it was really like a paper source threw up in there a little bit. Like it was a little gross. It was like, okay, I get it. Like it was a little over top, but it was really fun and really a different way to plan a party. But I really enjoy it. I like seeing people come together, and I really like when people don't know each other and watching that happen. Like it's a little bit like a play. You know what I mean? So I enjoy that.
I was reading an article the other day on The Ringer, theringer.com, and they were talking about how social media has changed the interior decorating landscape, especially for a party where people, they have like the Instagram background wall.
Yeah.
Where it's like the luau kind of shit or whatever, and and it's it's a whole thing,
And I thought about it. I will say
Sure.
that for the birthday party, I considered it. And there was a place, on the dining room table, I had all these paper flowers and high branches. I guess you could have done it there. And I thought about doing like one of those like eucalyptus wreaths and making one.
Yeah.
But then that got a little intense. You know what I mean? I was like, am I really going to do that? And are people really going to take their pictures? And is that really what I'm trying to do here? I would venture to say no. Like that's not what I was about. And I think people did take a couple of pictures here and there, but for the most part, they just talked to each other. And to me, that's a successful party.
Get out.
I know. Unheard of. But honestly, to me, that's a successful party. It was it was a good time.
Yeah, I love that. I like the focus of intention, the intentionality of all of the things. It reminds me of ceremony. I mean, I've done a lot of different ceremonies and stuff, and that mindset, that attitude of intentionality, I think is so important. It seems to imbue, rooms or objects, or it creates a vibe that you just don't get when things are kind of haphazard.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I grew up with parents who were pretty haphazard. So I think for me, as I sort of become more of an adult every day, I mean, I know I'm in my 40s, but I really feel like maybe I just sort of hit adulthood a few years ago. And as I continue to grow, I notice that it's okay that I grew up in chaos. It's fine as long as I'm able to kind of recognize that and say, yep, that's what that was, and that's not really what I want. And it's okay. It doesn't mean that they made tons of mistakes or they were horrible parents, or they did the best they could do in what they had, and this is the best I can do in what I have. And so I think it's given me a lot of peace. I had my parents visit in the summer, and I had a dinner party, and it was so interesting to see them massively uncomfortable in a setting where I was the one in charge and I was in control. And my mom totally went with it. She was like really in it. And my dad, I mean, we definitely gave him a little, like, he was like, the glass you gave me to drink is a little bigger than everybody else's. I think you're trying to get me drunk. I was like, right, I am. I'm not going to even pretend to lie about it. Right. Exactly. I was like, correct. Please keep drinking, You're much nicer when you do. So, and my mom was just so cute because she's like, I just think she had a good time. I sat her purposely with my friend Amber because my friend Amber does a lot of yoga, and I know that my mom does too. And I knew they would kind of connect. And my mom really likes skinny white women because she thinks they're cute. So I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's part of it. And she kept saying to Amber, your head is so small. It's so pretty. And Amber was like, that's weird. But like she went with it because that's who Amber is. And, it was a good situation. And at some point we realized that Amber looked like the baby Krishna. So we started calling Amber Baby Krishna, and my mom was like clapping her hands like, Baby Krishna, because that's a huge compliment to be Baby Krishna, So that's kind of how that...
Big responsibility, though.
Huge responsibility, totally. I don't know. It's a lot to put on your shoulders, but Amber's up for the task.
Nice. Speaking of parents, you turned me on to BoJack Horseman.
Yes.
That show's intense.
It is intense.
I just finished, I don't know, I think it was season 4, where they had the whole arc with his mom and then her childhood and the whole thing. And it's, woo. I mean, I appreciate Family Guy. I love Big Mouth, but BoJack is tackling, like, it's intense.
It is.
Sometimes I have to pause it or stop and just kind of stare at a wall.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough show. It is. I think it's one of those shows that really shows you that hurt people hurt people. And I think that, the first time I heard that expression, I didn't really understand it. And I kind of was like, oh, I mean, that's just like a clever play on words. But in fact, it was the reality that I grew up in, the reality that most people grow up in, I think. And BoJack really, I think it really talks about pain and addiction in a way that I don't know that anybody has. I mean, I think that, it's funny too, because he's a horse, which is complete, like they're all, it's this crazy animal, universe that they've created, but which I think you need that distance to be able to handle the topics that they're really tackling. But, the way that they talk about addiction, the way they talk about inner voice, there's that episode where he's at the beginning of it, he's like, oh, this isn't going to work out. I'll just have some more pills. I'll just have a few more drinks. I'll just do this. And it's like, I think he was trying to complete the task of picking up milk or something. It was like something very...
Yeah, he was going to the store.
Yeah, it was a very small task, right? But that's what addiction does, right? And having low self-esteem and all of that is that you have this very small task ahead of you and you don't know how to solve it because you won't just do it. Instead, you put all of these obstacles in your way and whatever your addiction of choice is, whether it's booze or pills or food or, codependence or whatever it is, so that you can't complete the task that will make you again, it can be very simple, but it's just like a task that you need to complete for you because there is such a lack of self-love. And that's really where it comes from, right? Because if you loved yourself, you would just complete the task and you wouldn't think about it. You would just buy the milk or, go to the gym or whatever it is. But yeah, I think it really shone a spotlight on that. And it showed me that ultimately this horse hates himself, and it doesn't matter how much money, how much success, how many women, whatever the case may be, all of this stuff didn't get him there. It didn't get him to this happy place because he wasn't dealing with loving himself. And part of the obstacle, like I think part of his background, his history, his backstory, having family life the way that he did, it set him for a poor foundation, and he never knew how to rebuild that foundation and grow from there. And he looked for, getting other people to say that he was great and that they loved him, thinking that would fill him up, fill his hole up, but it never did, of course.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty brilliant show. I love it. And my brother and I watch it together, and it is, it's very emotional for both of us. Like we really relate to it, and I'm not really able to watch it without losing my mind and crying and getting really upset. Like I'm thinking about it now and I'm starting to tear up. It's really powerful. I really recommend it to anybody who is having any problems on the planet in their own lives because it addresses so much, Yeah.
Yeah. It took me a little while to get into it. Season 1 was a bit of, he's a horse.
Right.
His agent's a cat.
Right.
Allison Brie is amazing, as Darlene. Yeah. And it took me a little while to get into it, but then once it gets going, it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
So in your own life, when did you realize that you were going to kind of take the power in your own hands to rewrite the experience of your childhood or to script a future that was different?
Well, I think there's lots of fits and starts, right? There are lots of moments of clarity that we all have. My friend Amber, baby Krishna, once said to me, "You're the happiest sad person I know. It's really easy to be around you when you're depressed because you still make sure that you are joking and keeping it light for all of us. Even though I know that there's a lot of dark stuff happening in your own heart, you just keep it moving. And it's interesting, right? Because she said that to me, and I thought that was very astute and really powerful to be told that. And that was probably 4 or 5 years ago when she said that to me. And that comment may have started it for me. That might have made me go, oh, something's going on. Like, I think that I'm tap dancing my way through and people don't know, but people know. They know what's happening. And, I'm the eldest of 4 kids. I'm close to all of my siblings, but my brother Vikram is probably my best friend. And so he started going through he decided to rewrite all of that a little earlier than I did.
Sure.
And I was watching him do it, and I was watching him gain confidence, and he started suggesting little things here and there. He had heard Whitney Cummings on Tim Ferriss on a podcast, and the name of I think the title of that podcast was something like Turning Pain into Creativity.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. And he said to me, without saying, you need to listen to this, he was like, yeah, I heard this, and it was just interesting. It just sort of reminded me of you. And like, he was like totally playing it cool. And it's probably a 2.5-hour pod, and I listened to it, and it was like, bam, it really started to connect. She's codependent. And I had heard that word, but I didn't really know what it was. And when she was explaining all of the things that she did because of being a codependent, I was like, yep. And I started checking it all off. And so then I started to do some research, and I realized that was the connective challenge in every failed relationship I had ever had. And I was noticing that the cycle is that I would have these very intense friendships with very charismatic women, very, very charismatic. And it would always like come to like a really like big, like we would have like a big trip, like we would go to Vegas, or we would go something very like big and sexy. And then expectations would not match the reality. And when I started to realize that was where all the problems lay, right? Like, I would think, oh, this is going to be like the best trip of my life, and we're going to do blah, 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 blah. And then when it wouldn't quite match, and I'd be crazy disappointed with the person and the situation and the whole thing. And then I would be really busy trying to take care of that person because the expectations weren't met. When I realized that was the pattern, I always thought the pattern was like, oh, I just didn't take any responsibility for it. I was like, oh, the pattern is that I just meet these crazy people, and, I don't know, like, they're crazy. It's not me. Well, come on now, like, it can't happen every time like that. So that sort of also happened at the same time. I started to realize that codependence was a modus operandi for me. And I was really quick to not take care of myself. And I thought, if I take care of other people, I'll be fulfilled. I will get enough love because of that. And it's really common to be codependent if you have parents who are mentally ill, or you come from an alcoholic parent or whatever. But for me, it was about, and it's pretty similar, they say, like having an alcoholic parent or a mentally ill parent, because it's about the same experience will yield a different result. So if I spilled a glass of milk at the kitchen table, some days it would be like it was the worst thing I could have done in the world, and I was yelled at in a way that like you can't even believe.
Wow.
And then there would be days where it was like, this is no big deal. I don't know what you're crying about. Because that's what would happen is I would get so upset, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I did this. And then it would be like, this is easy breezy. Like, I don't know what you're all upset about. So I think that when that's the case, you are constantly looking to caretake because you want to get ahead of it, right? If you're ahead of somebody getting upset with you and you're so busy taking care of them, then nobody can be mad at you, because having somebody be upset with you is the worst thing. So I think for me anyway, that's kind of where it came from. And when that started to kind of click in and realizing that addiction was something, it was just a way to like self-soothe rather than, no, I really like to drink. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, give me some tequila. Like, it wasn't about that. And I realized that I'm not an alcoholic, but I was drinking alcoholically because I just didn't know how to handle a situation. And I felt like, I don't want to have the emotions right now. So I think I'll just drink and that'll make it okay. So that was like, those were a lot of big, kind of bubbles that kind of started to pop up around me, and realizing all of that stuff kind of at the same time. And then I started seeing you about a year ago, and you sort of got into my life at a time where I was able to have a lot more vision and I was able to really see things rather than sweep them under a rug, particularly with my parents. And, I mean, they're not that old. They're in their 60s, but I don't have that much more time with them. And I just want the rest of the time to be pleasant. I'm not going to change them. And they're certainly not going to change me. And I just don't want them to have any power over me in the way that they have, So that's kind of what I'm working towards. And I think most people are.
One of the things that, I was aware of, tears kind of coming to my eyes as you were just telling your story. And I think about when I've worked with clients over the years that grow up in an environment that's so unpredictable.
Right.
Is something that I am very grateful that I just didn't have to deal with that. I mean, parents have their issues, but for me, there was, even though we lived in a bunch of different houses, my memory of it is that things were pretty constant. But friends that I've had that grew up with parents who were alcoholics or drug addicts, and one of my good friends, his mom tried to kill him a couple of times, and she was sick. But that I just can't even. I've heard enough stories, but I can't really imagine what that would be like to be in an environment that was so unpredictable, where someone comes home and, was dad at the bar or not? Was he in a good mood or not? Did he get paid or not? Or did mom, whatever, is she drinking or not this afternoon?
Right.
And the kind of instability internally that must have generated.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you don't realize it when you're a kid. And it's the kind of thing where because we grew up in such a white community, it was an 11,000 person town, one stoplight, 3 black families, 2 Indian families, like literally when you can count on one hand, that's white, And I will say that I just sort of assumed, because you're a kid and you don't know any better, I was like, oh, this is what it means to be Indian. So you just kind of put it all in the same bucket. You're like, well, to be Indian means to be crazy. And it means that it's super unpredictable. And I just want to live in a house where everyone is white and eats bologna on white bread with mayo and mustard and maybe lettuce and tomato. And, and then they watch The Cosby Show, which, let's face it, that has some really different applications now.
Different thing now.
Yeah. But, that's kind of what you want. And I think that that's really what creates this path to self-loathing, right? And thinking, well, if I can distance myself from my culture, it means that I can be free of it and I can be somebody completely different. And I don't have to participate in whatever that is over there because I don't want part of that. And I think now as an adult, sort of refinding my culture and my people and realizing that I have a lot in common with other Indian people, because that's just how it is. Like, I didn't have a lot of Indian friends growing up, and that was by design in some ways, right? I mean, we didn't grow up in a community where there was a lot of that. And the older I got, the less social my parents were. So there just weren't a lot of kids my age that were Indian. And, all the family was in India. We didn't travel there very much. Once a summer. I'm probably the one who has the most connection to India out of all the kids. But it was, again, kind of by design that we didn't have that as part of our lives. And we had this sort of weird, like we were inoculated from it, right? And we were in this like weird little house of, I mean, we as siblings, we always call it the house that crazy built, which is our sort of way of discussing our parents. I mean, my mother is a hoarder. She, it was hard to have people over at the home. It helped to further distance us from other people. So I was constantly with other friends at their homes and taking lots of notes. Oh, so this is how you eat at the dinner table. This is how you use a fork and a knife. Oh, I see. You put the knife down. You switch hands. Like little things like that. It made a big difference. So it felt like, in a lot of ways, that everything was a performance rather than just living, right? Because if you're seeing the way your parents are living and none of it is connecting, and you have to figure out, okay, how do I pass for normal if I just take notes from everybody else, all of my friends, and do what they do? Are you really in your own skin and in your own body, right? Or are you just performing it? So I think that's really what it's been for me, is like, now I'm not living a performative life. I'm living my own life. And that is sort of the crossover, right? It's a big deal to kind of get there.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
Am I an asshole that when you were talking, part of what I was imagining was remembering is that Steve Martin movie, The Jerk? Did you ever see that movie?
I have, yeah.
Where he like doesn't realize that he's white. He grows up in the black house, and I think he hears like country music for the first time, and he realizes that he.
Right. He's starting to snap his fingers. That's right. And he's got the beat. Yeah.
That's when I knew something was different.
No, you're not a jerk at all. That's an amazing. I'm so glad your brain went there. Actually, I love it.
Oh man, one of the things is that you're talking that keeps striking me is you use the word expectations, and that's kind of the root of unhappiness. It's that the expectations and then unmet expectations, and whenever I'm doing this kind of inner work, it seems to always come back to what was the expectation, what's the disappointment, and then what's the meaning that we're ascribing to the disappointment.
Yeah.
And I loved it when you were first talking, it's like you were taking accountability for the expectation. Right. And that's like the real thing. Like that, for me, that's part of the big awareness. And we want to become aware of the meaning that we wrote about ourselves and the meaning of our self-esteem or whatever when the expectation wasn't met. But if we could just chuck the expectation to begin with,
right,
that's a whole other level of freedom. But I've seen, some people that don't want to get off of it, they like the expectation because that's what keeps the distance. That's what allows them to hold grudges. That's what allows them, justifies being shitty. I've been that person many times.
Sure.
And yet I just keep coming back to, well, what was I expecting? What was I expecting? I expected the trip to be like this. Well, it's not like that. So what does it mean?
Yeah.
Or I expected the dinner party to be this way, and these people ended up fighting, and this was a thing, and it's like, okay, so am I going to write that I was a bad host? Or is that just something that needed to happen? Maybe it worked out because that's how it had to go.
Right. I've been very lucky. All the parties have gone really well. But I will say that, the cocktail party did not I didn't have an expectation as to how it would go. I was really careful about it. I thought about it a lot. Like, I'm going to do all of this stuff, A, B, and C. It took me a month to plan it. It was not, it was not a small thing for me. But I also kind of knew it's January. There could be a snowstorm. It could be that nobody shows up. These things happen.
Right.
It could be that the L train is down and maybe, half the party won't come because of that. I sort of thought about all of that stuff, and I was like, I'm just going to have fun with whoever is there, and that's going to be fine. And I'll either have a ton of leftovers or there'll be no food left. Yeah. And it is what it is. But I think, expectation is something I have fought my whole life. I think it's why I was so upset with my parents for so long. I expected them to be like the parents that my friends had. But how could they be that? They had very different experiences. They didn't grow up in America. They grew up in a different country. They came over. My mother really didn't want to be in America to begin with. She still doesn't. She's still like, let's get out of here. So, it's like, there's no way that they could ever have been the same. I know that we're not supposed to regret things, but sometimes I do. I regret that I didn't just enjoy them for who they were. But now I've got time. Like, my mom is funny, as it turns out. She's very silly, and she does silly things. And she did a few silly things when we were kids, but I never really thought about that. I was too busy thinking, oh, she doesn't dress in nice clothes, and she doesn't look like all the other moms, and she doesn't make a pot roast or whatever it was. But it's like I was so busy saying what she wasn't that I didn't understand who she was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. That's beautiful. One of the things that I've always appreciated about our sessions is, your willingness to go to those places, and to have the courage to be curious. Even if what we see in the mirror isn't always nice.
Yeah.
And I just think that's such an admirable quality. And so I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, there are definitely moments where I'm like, well, that was ugly. I'm like, well, but, I have found that after I leave our sessions, I have a larger understanding of, whether it's a small thing, a small piece of what I'm working on, or sometimes it's really big and I have to go home and I have to kind of lay in bed for a minute because, it's so big that I'm like, holy cow, I never connected that. I never connected that this is how I thought about men or relationships or whatever it may have been. But there have definitely been a lot of aha moments in that room for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's setting the intention too. It's just like for the party, where it's like, I set the intention that, I want that space to be a space that people feel comfortable, and hopefully reconnect with the good parts of themselves, the parts that they like. And so I'm happy that you have that experience.
Well, I have to tell you that one of the things that I said to a friend of mine, because they were like, well, you saw a therapist before and it didn't work for you. Like, what was the difference? And the therapist was a good therapist, by the way. It was nothing about her skill set. And I said, you know what it is I don't think about what I'm going to say before I walk in that room. And when I was with the therapist, I always did. I was like, okay, I'm going to plan it out. Yeah. We're going to talk about this. And then I'm going to make her laugh at minute 7. And literally, it was like I was doing a 45-minute set. Yeah. And
working on your material.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think that, it's that performative quality and just pushing that aside and realizing that's not what this is about. This is about really working on real stuff. And there is something about trusting the moment, because I think that if you trust the process and you trust the moment, you trust the practitioner, then it's going to work out, and whatever we have to work on, we'll work on in that moment. But I don't think that I ever trusted the process before. So
it strikes me again with that idea of kind of releasing expectation, having faith and trust that you're going to get what you need.
Yes.
And that's like that joke of, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Those two things that you bring into the treatment room, the lack of expectation and the trust in the process.
Yeah.
It's like we don't tend to bring those to our close relatives.
No, we definitely don't.
There's no trust in the process.
No.
And a lot of expectations.
No, there definitely isn't. I mean, it was funny. My brother and I were talking about, well, maybe we'll take a trip with mom and dad. I was like, that's a horrible idea. We should definitely not do that. Can you imagine what that's going to look and feel like? And he was like, well, maybe. And I was like, no, maybe about it. They hate traveling and they're not good at it. And it stresses you out. It stresses me out. Let's just see them in their home the way that they're the most comfortable there. They're not comfortable on the planet to begin with. So let's just be with them in the place where they are the most comfortable and respect that. I'm fine with that now. I'm okay. It used to make me sad that like, oh, we can't take a cruise with my parents. Well, first of all, I don't want to go on a cruise, but also like, that's fine. That's okay.
Right.
That's not what we're doing, you know?
Yeah. I love that. And tilting the scales onto the side of success, of having a good meeting, going in and say, okay, so if we do it at their house, that's where they feel safe. That's where they feel comfortable. I can handle being in that environment, so that's okay. And then looking for success, seeing your mom be quirky and silly and, getting a laugh out of that instead of all of the 40 things that she's doing that you don't like or, all that.
Right.
Yeah.
And knowing that there's an end point. That helps.
Yeah.
Knowing
having
that
the escape hatch.
Right. Like knowing, okay, I can
leave.
Right. Like I can do this for 3 hours. Like I can do anything for 3 hours, So I think that really helps. And I think it helps them too. Like they used to pretend, I don't want to say they pretended, but they used to be like, oh, we're so sad that you're not staying here anymore. I'm like, no, you're not. You're actually really relieved, but you don't know that yet. You'll get there. And now they are. They don't even think to ask to have us over there. So I think that they realized that there were some things that were a little bit out of their control. They just don't like when they're not the ones who come up with the idea, But now that they see that this is how it is, they're a lot more comfortable too. So, oddly, boundaries work.
Yeah.
As it turns out.
Go figure.
I know. So it's been better.
And I think, I don't know, I'm playing with this idea that boundaries are great to establish some sense of security as a stepping stone to get to the point where you realize that boundaries may not be necessary. In the sense of being able to go anywhere, be with anyone, and feel however you want to feel, which is kind of the motto that I always strive for.
Right.
And to be able to go with the flow. And knowing that your sense of self is preserved, or, what is the self anyway? Not to get too fucking deep, but, to be in that where your sense of who you are isn't dictated by whatever's going on around you.
Right.
And part of the problem that I don't like with boundaries, especially I see this a lot with my single clients that I'm working with, is that they come from such a place of defensiveness that it's harder for them to invite in love. It's harder to, to create a boundary that still is, that still says I'm accessible.
Right. No, I get that. Yeah. I had a dear friend who, I lived with her when I was in my 20s, both in our 20s, and she used to say, what flavor of Sumi are we going to get today? Which I think gives you a good sense of who I was in my 20s. Who was I? And it was because I was a chameleon. I would manipulate myself to sort of deal with each situation as it presented itself, but more specifically to whoever I was dealing with, right? So, and what it was that I wanted. It was, again, I was in a play. Like, what were my, what was my objective?
Right.
What was I trying to obtain? And who did I need to be? And what did I need to say to be able to get that? So, I think when you push that stuff away and I think you're just yourself and you're just sort of bobbing along and, the world that you live in your own little brain, and you are presented with other people or other situations, if you trust in yourself, if you really know yourself, then you're right. Those boundaries aren't really so key because they already exist for you. I think that's what you mean, yes?
Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I even know what I mean, but it's it's a work in progress.
Yeah, because I will say that probably even as little as like 5 years ago, if I was in this scenario, let's just talk about this situation, I think I would have really thought about it. I would have written some ideas out. I would have had some notes. I would have been nervous.
Sure.
And I wasn't nervous. I was nervous in that, like, it's a new situation. It's a new setting.
Right.
But I wasn't nervous in the way that I would have been, right? Because it was like, well, it is what it is. Like, we'll have a conversation, and if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, whatever. He has an editor. He'll work it out.
Right.
So,
Shout out to Blake.
Blake. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's also part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like you just have to kind of you have to play it as it lays.
Yeah.
Is that the expression?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that when it comes especially to dating, calling out some of that stuff with someone that you like, and if the things are kind of progressing a little bit, I think is really helpful. I mean, I'm reminded of when I started hanging out with Jen. She, she's beautiful and in Miami and surrounded by dudes with all sorts of things. And, I was going through divorce and I found myself wanting to posture. I was aware of myself of wanting to say the right thing and be the right thing and sort of present myself as kind of, puffed up and whatever. And I'm grateful that I had that awareness.
Right.
And I was also sort of disgusted by that. And I told her, just came right out. I was like, hey, I want you to know that like, I'm very aware right now of this kind of internal dialogue and I don't like it. And so I don't want to like, I'm aware that it's coming up and, I don't even necessarily know what I'm going to do about it, except right now I'm going to let you know that that's what's going on.
Wow.
And there it is, and she was tremendous. She was just like, I like you because, you don't have to do those things. It's like, she's like, yeah, if I wanted to be with a guy with a black Amex, like I could do that, but that's not what I'm looking for.
Right.
But just calling that out was incredibly helpful. Another friend of mine is dating a guy. And he had a similar thing where he was very vulnerable about something kind of early on, but he was stressed and he was just like, hey, this is what's happening, and I think that was a huge stepping stone to, that kind of intimacy, this sort of safety and intimacy that I think a lot of people are looking for, that they want to set the boundaries up. Yeah. It's like, no, you get there by stepping into what's unsafe. And then it's like the safety is created. Like, we don't really feel safe and then get vulnerable. It's like you get vulnerable and then the safety can happen or it can't. And safety is all a bullshit illusion anyway, but it's better than feeling unsafe. It's an illusion that I like to live in.
Right. It's what I enjoy too. Yeah.
I'll feed that illusion.
Yeah, for sure. Use your illusion. No, I get that. I mean, I think, before we started talking, you were like, oh, if there's something, if you feel like you really go there in the conversation and you need to not have this shared with the world, just let me know. And I was like, yeah, this is what it is now. Like, I'm pretty vulnerable and pretty open with clients, with friends, with my family. Who I'm not so vulnerable with is the opposite sex. Dating is still like a big block for me. And that's like the next big, I think that's the next big project for me, right? Because I have to figure out, I like going home and talking to my dog. Like, I went home the other day and I ironically got an edible and my friend Sarah and I shared it, and I went home and like I had a full-fledged conversation with the dog. Like, nice. I really did. Yeah. And he supported me, and I'm going to do Whole30 next week, and he supported me in that. Oh, good. So yeah, he was like, oh yeah, you should definitely do it, Mom. I'm really on board. So in any event, I was like, I don't know, can we change? Can we do it, Mouse? Yeah. What do you think? And he was like, you can do it. I believe in you.
Nice.
So, that's great, but I would like a person to also talk to, and I think that I'm ready for that. I think that, I'm better about knowing who I am, and I think I'm, starting to open that door to self-love in a way that I just haven't before. But it's a battle, you know what I mean? So part of me is like, when I hear you say, it's about being vulnerable and that's what creates the illusion of safety, I'm like, oh, am I trying to think that like I need to be like really so full of self-love before I'm really out there? Or is it really something that happens in tandem? And I think that's a challenge, right? That's sort of what happens when people are perfectionists, which I definitely am. and having that perfectionism. I think we've talked about this perfectionism, procrastination, paralysis,
right?
Which I'm in serious paralysis.
Getting ready to get ready.
Yeah. I love to get ready to get ready. That's my favorite thing to do. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, it's so interesting for me to hear you talk about relationship coaching and just sort of opening that door. And we don't talk about it a lot, but we have started to because it's clear directionally that's where I'm headed. Yeah.
Which is great. Yeah, I do think that the self-love is done in tandem with the partnership. I mean, this idea of cultivating enough self-love to be ready to date is an interesting one. For me, I always think of that as enlightenment in the cave, which is fine. Lots of people are enlightened in the cave, but then you got to go back to the village at some point.
Right.
If you want that kind of, relationship with other humans. So that's where, I find a lot of the value with doing the dating and relationship coaching is because to be able to support people as they are going out into the world and are encountering some reflection of themselves and their expectations. And with dating, it's fun because it's just so obvious that if after a swipe on Tinder or a ghost after the first date, it's not really about the date. It's just all of our own shit. But you get people who've been married for 15 years and they're convinced that it actually is about the other person. And that's a harder thing to unravel. I'm just not interested in doing that, at least not right now. And so, yeah, like in that case, when I was telling Jen about how I was aware of what was coming up for me, I definitely my saying it was great. Her reaction to it was also nice. And I definitely felt a greater sense of, I don't know, self-love or self-pride or something to have had the awareness, caught it, not fed into it, spoken about it, disarmed it, like that whole thing. And had I not been trying to be in a relationship, I don't know what would have happened. I would have been like, oh, I'm posturing. I'm playing a role, like Siegfried the cat. What do you think?
Right.
And then it just sort of ends there. And so I definitely think that you don't have to be 100% self-love.
Right.
But recognizing the sort of, again, the expectations and not wanting somebody to, not needing someone to rescue you and not needing somebody, the new guy, to erase all of the damage that every man in your life has done before. Like that's an unfair expectation.
Yeah, nobody can do that.
Right.
Trust me, not even me. I mean, and I get that, sometimes I think about the whole self-love thing. I'm like, because I think I'm very visual. So I'm like, is it just like this bucket where I'm like throwing all this self-love into? Do you know what I mean? Or is it more like a waterfall and it's just sort of circulating, right? So clearly it's the latter. And, and I know that now. I think I can visualize it that way. And I think I've worked in a bucket world for a long time where I just felt like, if there's enough money in this, if there's enough thinness in this bucket or what, all of these things, all these attributes, right? If that bucket is filled, then I'm prepared, I'm ready. But that's not how it works. And, and there are definitely moments where, I just completely freeze and I'm like, maybe I will just be alone for the rest of my life. And what will that look like? And I think it's important to have that conversation too, because you know what? Would it be so bad? Would it be so bad? I think I look at the life that I have now and I'm so lucky. I have all these wonderful friends and family, and I'm never alone unless I want to be.
Yeah.
I make those choices to be like, I don't want to see anybody today.
Yeah.
I choose that. So, it's okay. But taking the next step and knowing that I want to really open the door and have somebody around all the time, it is scary to think about it,
Right.
But I think I'm ready. I'm ready to have somebody pick on me and I pick on them.
Yeah.
And, we joke around and we watch some bad TV and make some meals and do that kind of thing. I want that. I do.
Nice.
I do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I heard this, I was listening to this coach talk the other day, and she was saying we did this exercise where she asked us to rate your kind of happiness on a scale of 1 to 10 in these different areas in your life. finances, relationship, impact was one that I thought was interesting, and some other categories.
Impact in your community?
Yeah, like the impact, like are you having the impact in the world that you want to have?
Oh, interesting.
And so you rate it from 1 to 10, 10 obviously being like you're super stoked. And what she said, I was fascinated by, where she said, if you rate something a 1 to 3, that's great, because you're so fed up with it, so desperate that you might actually do something about it. You're more inclined to take action. And if you're at an 8 to a 10, that's also great, because you've got enough joy and momentum. You like that. You're going to keep it going.
Yeah.
And she said the death trap is between 4 and 7.
Wow.
So if you rate something as a 4 and a 7, she goes, that is no man's land, because you're just happy enough that if things don't change, you'll sort of be okay.
Right.
And you're not desperate enough. There's not enough good momentum going to keep it going. And you're also not frustrated and fed up enough that you just stay in that zone. And I was like, it was such an aha moment. I was like, whoa.
It's about mediocrity, right? It's like if you're a mediocrity, baby, like that's bad. I never thought about things that way.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So she was saying, in terms of like a sales call or in your own inner thing, that you have to move yourself from the 4 to 7. You've got to either just be so fed up with it, or start celebrating enough good things, which is a healthier way to go, obviously. Start seeing what's good about that stuff, so that you can get it to an 8 or a 9 or a 10, where you're going to get more positive momentum going.
Right. And ultimately, it's about movement.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, which is why the waterfall is better than the bucket.
Do you know that there's a kid's book called something like Fill Your Bucket?
No.
Yeah, so there's a kid's book. It's something about filling buckets. And the whole premise of the kid's book is like everyone's got a bucket that's like this invisible bucket above their head. And when you feel good, your bucket is full. And when you do nice things for somebody, or when you give them a compliment, you're helping to fill someone's bucket. And so the book is something like, one of the questions is like, have you filled someone's bucket today? And how's your own bucket? And I remember my first
I did read this book as a kid. Maybe that's where this is coming from.
I remember my first teacher who used to talk about, he would talk about healing, and he said, you're just like, we're just these giant vessels, these giant containers, or he used the word pitcher. He's like, you're just a giant pitcher. And he's like, your job with self-care is to, with meditation and prayer and ceremony and whatever, is to fill your pitcher. And he said, if someone comes to you for healing, or you see someone who's suffering, or if you're just being out in the world, you just kind of tip over and let some of that, your abundance and that energy overflow, and you just kind of helps, fill someone else's energy field. And I always like that image.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah.
That's better than a bucket.
Yeah, the pitcher. It's a little bit more kind of an interaction.
Yeah. Bucket is just like plop, But a pitcher, first of all, it's more elegant, but also there's movement with a pitcher. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I'm going to think about that more.
Get back to me.
I like it. Yes.
All right. Awesome. Well, this has been so great. Thanks so much for coming. Is there anything that you want to plug, promote, any way that you want people to get in touch with you?
No, I mean, listen, I'm a real estate broker. So if you're looking to buy or rent or sell, call me, I guess. I mean, I'm that gal, but I'm not, I'm also, there's a lot more to me than just that. Right. So, but also I do some comedy. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, you can.
Yep.
What's your handle? It's just me and the dog. It's team.mouse.nyc.
Awesome.
And I'm, you can also just stalk me because I have an open Instagram. So if you want to do that, you can do that as well.
She's single, fellas. Yeah.
I'm open. I'm a pitcher. So get out there. Thanks, James.
Thanks so much for coming on. And to the rest of you out there, thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you guys next time.